What did it really cost to have power in a royal court? You won't find the answer in an accounting book. It wasn't paid in gold or jewels. The real price was much, much steeper. It was paid in blood, betrayal, and the constant nagging fear that one wrong word could send you straight to the executioner's block. Serving a king or queen promised incredible influence and riches, a life at the very center of the world. But this glittering world was really a gilded cage, a deadly maze where just surviving was the real prize. For every courtier enjoying the king's favor, there were a dozen more in the shadows, plotting and whispering, just waiting for their moment. Loyalty was the currency of the realm, but its value could crash overnight. It could make you the king's best friend one day and a condemned traitor the next. In this world, the road to greatness was paved with the ruins of those who failed. Today, we're uncovering the stories of those who paid the ultimate price and revealing how the dazzling spectacle of royalty was a high-stakes game very few could afford to play. Getting into a royal court's inner circle meant stepping onto a stage. And on this stage, you weren't just judged by your wit or your politics, but by the very clothes on your back. This wasn't just fashion. It was brutal, high-stakes political theater. You showed your loyalty and status through incredibly expensive displays of wealth. For a courtier, the price of just looking the part could be their entire fortune. Across the great courts of Europe, from the Tudors in England to the Bourbons in France, strict dress codes were the law. These weren't suggestions. They were rules that dictated the fabrics, colors, and styles you could wear based on your rank. Breaking them was a social crime, and sometimes a literal one. But just meeting the standard wasn't enough. To get noticed, you had to go way beyond it. This meant ordering clothes of unbelievable luxury, velvets, silks, and cloth of gold, covered in gems and intricate patterns that took artisans months to make. A single outfit could cost the equivalent of tens of thousands of dollars today, and you couldn't just have one. Courtiers were expected to have a huge wardrobe because repeating an outfit at a big event was a sign that your money, and therefore your influence, was running out. The pressure was constant and crushing. The English courtier, Lady Louisa Stuart, complained that an annual income of $1,500, a fortune that would put a family comfortably in the upper class, was nowhere near enough for a couple to keep up appearances at court. Families mortgaged their ancestral homes and fell into debts they could never escape, bankrupting generations, all to fund one person's career at court. This wasn't an accident. It was part of the monarch's design. A king knew that a court full of indebted nobles was a court of dependent nobles, their fortunes tied directly to his favor. And when you think of the cost of royal glamour, who comes to mind? Marie Antoinette. While France's massive financial crisis was caused by bigger things, like expensive wars and a broken tax system, the Queen's lavish lifestyle became a lightning rod for public anger. She was a famous trendsetter, known for her enormous hairstyles and stunning gowns. Even though she later switched to a simpler style, the image of her as a wild spender stuck. She was cruelly nicknamed Madame Deficit, with pamphlets accusing her of bankrupting the nation all by herself. Then came the infamous affair of the diamond necklace, a scandal where she was framed in a plot to steal from the crown jewelers. Despite being completely innocent, it destroyed her reputation. The truth about her spending was more complex, but in the court of public opinion, perception was everything. The price she paid wasn't just for dresses, but for her reputation and, in the end, her life. The people saw a queen in luxury while they starved, and that feeling helped light the revolutionary fire that burned down the monarchy. For courtiers and royals alike, your wardrobe was both a weapon and a weakness. It was the price of admission to the world of power, a glittering costume that, for many, hid the financial quicksand underneath. So, let's say a courtier managed to not go bankrupt. They'd then face an even bigger threat, everyone else at court. Royal courts weren't happy gatherings of loyal subjects. They were snake pits of ambition, jealousy, and paranoia. Getting the king's favor was a zero-sum game. For you to rise, someone else had to fall. This created a relentless, cutthroat world where loyalty was a shield, but also a target. Being close to the king gave you power, but it also made you the person everyone else wanted to take down. The court was a tangled web of shifting alliances and bitter rivalries. Factions formed around powerful people, all fighting for influence and prestigious jobs. A single wrong word, a tiny slight, or a rumor whispered in the right ear could destroy a career. Betrayal wasn't just a risk, it was a strategy. Courtiers became masters of the backhanded compliment and the strategically leaked secret. Some even sold state secrets or spied for foreign countries to get ahead or ruin a rival. Look no further than the tragic story of Robert Devereux, the second Earl of Essex. He showed up at Queen Elizabeth III's court as a young, handsome, and impossibly charming nobleman. The aging queen, 33 years his senior, was completely smitten. He became her favorite, and she loved his flattery and wit. But Essex was as arrogant as he was charming. He was vain, fiercely jealous, and had no patience for anyone who challenged him, not even the queen. His meteoric rise made him powerful enemies, especially the faction led by the sly and patient Robert Cecil. They just watched and waited for the impulsive Essex to make a fatal mistake. He didn't disappoint them. In one famous blow-up in 1598, after the queen denied one of his requests, Essex insolently turned his back on her. An unbelievable insult. Elizabeth, enraged, boxed his ears. Essex's hand flew to his sword, and he was only stopped by another courtier jumping between them. His downfall sped up when he was sent to Ireland to crush a rebellion. He led a huge army, but the campaign was a total disaster, which he blamed on his rivals back home. Directly defying the Queen's orders, he abandoned his post, raced back to England, and burst into her private bedchamber before she had her wig on or makeup done. For the notoriously vain Queen, this was a horrifying violation. Stripped of his titles and his main source of income, Essex was cornered. Humiliated and furious, he made one last, desperate move. In February 1601, he and a few hundred followers marched into London to try and force a coup, but the people didn't rally to his side. The rebellion was a miserable failure. Essex was arrested, tried for treason, and found guilty. His charm and his history with the Queen couldn't save him. On February 25, 1601, Robert Devereux was beheaded inside the Tower of London, a final small mercy from the Queen he had so spectacularly betrayed. His story is a chilling reminder that in the snake pit of the court, favor was temporary, enemies were patient, and the line between favorite and traitor was dangerously thin. But even if you survived the financial ruin and the backstabbing, the greatest danger was often the person you worked for, the monarch themselves. To be in the inner circle was to live in the shadow of someone who held the power of life and death. A king's favor could feel like warm sunshine, but his anger could be a lightning strike, sudden, total, and deadly. This was the jester's gamble. The closer you got, the more you could make the king laugh, but the easier it was to lose your head. The personality of the ruler set the tone for everything. Serving a stable king was one thing, but history is full of paranoid, cruel, and volatile monarchs. Under a king like Henry VIII of England, the court was a place of pure psychological terror. His obsession with having a male heir led to a revolving door of wives and advisors who went from the height of power to the executioner's block with stunning speed. Men like Thomas Cromwell and Sir Thomas More, once the king's most trusted allies, were executed when their conscience clashed with the king's unstoppable will. A courtier's entire life and legacy could be destroyed, not by some grand political mistake, but by a personal insult or just a shift in the political winds. Nobody understood this better than Sir Walter Raleigh. He was a true Renaissance man, a soldier, poet, explorer, and courtier, and a glittering favorite in the court of Queen Elizabeth I. But he made one huge mistake. In 1592, the queen found out he had secretly married one of her ladies-in-waiting without her permission. To Elizabeth, her maids of honor were her personal wards, and their marriages were her business. Furious at the betrayal, she threw Raleigh and his new wife in the Tower of London. He eventually bought his way back into some favor, but things were never the same. The real bill for that mistake came due years later, after Elizabeth died. When King James I took the throne, Raleigh's luck ran out. He was accused of being part of a plot against the new king in 1603 and sentenced to death. But the sentence wasn't carried out. Instead, Raleigh spent 13 years as a prisoner in the Tower, where he lived with his family and even wrote a history of the world. In 1617, he was released for one last, desperate roll of the dice, an expedition to South America to find the legendary city of gold, El Dorado. There was one critical condition: he had to avoid fighting with the Spanish, since King James was trying to keep the peace. The trip was a disaster. They didn't find El Dorado, and a group of Raleigh's men attacked a Spanish outpost against his orders. When Raleigh returned to England empty-handed, the furious Spanish ambassador demanded that his original death sentence from years ago be carried out. King James, wanting to protect his relationship with Spain, agreed. On October 29, 1618, a full 15 years after he was first convicted, Sir Walter Raleigh was beheaded. His fate was sealed not by his final failure, but by the old treason charge, brought back to life to serve a new political goal. Raleigh gambled on the favor of monarchs, and in the end, he lost everything. But it wasn't just the courtiers paying this price. The monarchs at the very top of this glittering, dangerous world were trapped too. The crown might have been a symbol of absolute power, but it was also an absolutely crushing burden. To command loyalty, a king had to project an image of untouchable wealth and authority, and that performance came at a staggering cost. Monarchs poured fortunes into their courts, not just for fun, but as a critical tool of power. Massive palaces, lavish parties, and over-the-top art were all meant to awe their subjects and foreign rivals, creating an aura of divine right and infinite resources. This spending was also a way to control people. By creating a court culture that required nobles to spend themselves into oblivion, a king could keep his most powerful subjects distracted and dependent on him. Nowhere is this strategy clearer than with King Louis XIV of France and his Palace of Versailles. Before Louis, the French nobles were a rebellious and powerful group who constantly challenged the king. Louis XIV solved that problem by building them a golden cage. He moved his court from Paris to the swamps of Versailles and turned a humble hunting lodge into the most magnificent palace on earth. Then he required his high nobility to live there with him for most of the year. Stuck at Versailles, the nobles were swept up in an endless cycle of bizarre rituals and ceremonies, their political power neutralized as they fought over tiny honors, like who got to hold the king's candlestick at bedtime. But this control had a jaw-dropping price tag. The construction and upkeep of Versailles was a black hole for money. Pinning down the exact cost is tough, but some estimates place it in the tens of billions of today's dollars. It took tens of thousands of workers and required nationalizing entire industries just to produce the luxurious goods the king demanded. This colossal spending spree put enormous strain on the French treasury. And this wasn't just happening in France. In Scotland, King James VI saw expenses for court life spiral so far out of control, they outpaced all the kingdom's revenue. For monarchs, this lavish spending was a double-edged sword. It was necessary to project power, but it often led to huge state debt, which meant higher taxes on the common people. This could fuel anger and instability, creating a vicious cycle. The very tool used to keep the elite loyal could turn the masses against you. The ostentatious wealth of Versailles may have tamed the nobility, but it created a massive disconnect with the French people, a grievance that would eventually explode into the French Revolution. In a tragic irony, The ultimate price for Versailles wasn't paid by Louis XIV, but by his descendant, Louis XV, who lost his head to the guillotine. The crown's burden was the constant need to feed the beast of royal prestige, a beast whose appetite could, and often did, eat the kingdom alive. The world of the royal court was a world of breathtaking contradictions. It was a place of high culture, art, and power, the very center of the universe. But beneath the polished floors and behind the beautiful tapestries, it was a brutal arena ruled by a simple, ruthless logic of risk and reward. The price of loyalty was paid in many forms, each one more costly than the last. It was paid in fortunes, as families went broke just for a place in a parade, hoping to catch the monarch's eye. It was paid in spirit, as courtiers learned to live in a world of constant suspicion, where any friend could be a rival, and any whisper could be a death sentence. And it was paid, all too often, in blood. The stories of men like the Earl of Essex and Sir Walter Raleigh show us that a monarch's favor was as unstable as a candle in a storm, easily snuffed out by jealousy, politics, or just a bad mood. Even the monarchs weren't free from the toll. They had to pour unbelievable wealth into the performance of power, building gilded cages like Versailles to control their own people, a strategy that could bankrupt the state and plant the seeds of its own destruction. In the end, the glittering world of royalty was a high-stakes game where the cost of playing was immense and the price of losing was absolute. If you found these stories of high-stakes survival as fascinating as we did, be sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into history's hidden corners, and let us know in the comments which courtier's story you found most compelling. Your support helps us keep uncovering the past. Thanks for watching.